Hi, it is me again, and dropping in to talk a little bit about narcissists in therapy. And when I was doing the last video, the term swords and shields just popped into my head. That old hymn, gonna lay down my sword and shield. And how that imagery came into my mind is, watching a narcissistic person coming into the therapy space and they have the shield, those psychological defense mechanisms that protect them. And then the sword, which is, the things they use to make themselves feel okay. So the hurtful words, the devaluation, um, the things they do to hurt other people. So I am going to write something about that for sure. But again, I'm thinking as I'm talking today and imagining if with me, if you will, this idea of the sword and the shield. And so what are they protecting against? Feelings of shame and vulnerability. So fundamentally, one of the interpersonal impairments that narcissists have is the inability to tolerate feelings of shame or vulnerability. And I would go a little bit further and say this also speaks to a very poor window of distress tolerance, right? They do not like feeling threatened or questioned or criticized. And that, of course, can be a cornerstone of the therapy process. But these are people who aren't necessarily capable of attunement, which is the neurobiological place where therapy is helpful, right? Within the therapeutic alliance and that experience of feeling seen and heard. So they'll want to be seen and heard, but with their shield up, with the fantasy idealized version of themselves that they want not only the therapist, but everyone else to see. So what's interesting is that often before even someone comes into the therapy space, there are some preliminary clues that someone may be narcissistic. Not that you would jump to that conclusion right away, but it might raise some flags. The one that has taken me a while to see is part of a pattern is they will often look for special treatment before they've even walked through the door. So they will want to be seen after regular office hours, which for many of us might mean an evening or a weekend appointment. But more often than not, it is simply during a time that they know you're not typically working. Number two, they will ask for special treatment. Most of the people who come to see me in therapy are very capable of writing notes. And I have several notebooks and notepads in my office available for that purpose. But I've had a handful of people recently ask me to take the notes for them, which would really be weird because if I'm taking notes about what happened in the session, I'm not focusing on them. And I'm sure it's not, summarizing the session and then sending that off to them. I actually think that might be on the verge of being unethical because it will have had to go through the lens of my memory. And I think it's much more effective for clients to take notes right in session, ask a question, write it down. There are some colorful markers and things that people are welcome to use in my office if that's helpful. But these are a couple of ways that that this can happen. I also had a client once who only wanted to be seen at 11 a.m., which she assumed was right before my lunch, so that her time could bleed over, right? Just thinking there wouldn't be another client after. It is essentially because of the entitlement, they're looking for special treatment. And this has not shown up any differently in paid private practice or in where I used to work in a government funded or state funded mental health program. It's the same. It is the same. Um, so those are some preliminary things. They will come in, again, here comes the shield and the sword. They will come in armed with all the information that they're seeking ahead of time. This didn't used to happen, but it does now. And I've had people say things like, I know more about this topic than you do, or I could do your job, or you get where I'm going with this. Again, there's that subtle sword devaluation going on, right? Something else that's kind of old school is they sometimes will feel that only a well-educated, psychologically minded person can understand them. There's another one. I actually think that might be true. There's an element of truth in that. And they tend to not be interested in what the therapist has to say, right? So it feels a little icky. Like, I'm just going to say something really strong. It feels a little prostitute archetype related, that you're being paid to listen to someone just sit and sound off. And when they're doing that, they're often talking about what good people they think they are, or how smart or brilliant or unique they think they are, or what good parents or spouses they think they are. And they don't give a rat's ass what you think as the therapist, which is interesting, right? Like, they really don't care. And as a therapist, there's an interesting counter transference thing that happens where, you may check out, you may not be paying attention, you may feel uncomfortable, you may get bored. That happens very, very commonly. A colleague and I used to talk about how there was a body sensation that would happen when we had someone with a personality disorder in the room. Both of us would get tension right up in our upper shoulders or neck when there was a more toxic person in the room. Quite often, people who are narcissistic will complain about or not want to pay for therapy. I think that might fall into the vindictiveness aspect. Like, if we said something they didn't like, or we did something they didn't like, or we made them think about themselves, or we triggered something, it's not at all uncommon that you won't get paid. Not uncommon whatsoever. There can be issues with boundary respect, which kind of ties in with what I was saying earlier, but they may seek to get personal information. I don't think they're particularly interested in you. It's just a boundary violation, and it can feel a little bit intrusive. There's a general understanding that narcissists can't be helped in therapy. And I don't think that it's wise to make such a wide sweeping comment. I think there are a lot of mitigating factors around that. I think that in terms of emotional regulation, a DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, might be something that's helpful. I think that group therapy can be a better fit for them, where they're going to learn some life skills in vivo or live as it's happening in their life. Anyone any therapists who do group therapy are shaking their heads at me if they're listening to this. But the treatment outcome is going to be based on the treatment investment. If they're there on their own volition, on their own dime, you're likely to see a better outcome than if they're there because of an ultimatum from a loved one, their workplace, or because there's been legal or criminal or involvement and it's court ordered. Hopefully that makes sense. I do think if there is any presenting depression, that can somewhat be treated using a simple behavioral based approach. Often, people who are narcissistic will come into therapy just until they feel better about themselves and then they will go. You'll see that happen. But in terms of like deep neurobiological change, that's not going to happen. You have to work at the developmental level they are actually at. Um, and I've heard Terry Real say, like, you kind of have to get as big as their personality and kind of call them out. You could. I think that, again, you'd be potentially, causing disaster. But you do need to be aware and be like wisely aware of that you've got a person in front of you whose sense of self and their sense of you is continually vacillating all the time. So being very sensitive to their own inner dysregulation. And so almost like step by step and bit by bit helping out with that. So the reason why I say this is because I think a lot of people, a lot of highly sensitive, empathic people, AKA most of my clients, come in with a deep curiosity about if therapy will help their narcissistic partner. And the short answer is couples therapy is not easy, and your narcissistic partner will focus on winning the therapist. They will focus on, if it's me, convincing me that they're a good partner, a good parent, they haven't done anything wrong, it's all the other person's fault, or they won't engage at all. You can see that that sometimes happens too. So I say this because I think that this is something that, family members, loved ones, partners can use to help unburden themselves with respect to trying to take care of the other person. Um, because you can't in that way. Um, if you were to take a run at couple therapy, and I'm really opinionated about this, it would need to be a highly boundaried, almost superficial, even solution focused kind of approach. So I use solution focused approaches in couple work anyway, just to help make sure people are on the same page about what the problem is and then build on what's already working and seeking solutions and kind of staying away from the more navel gazing and focusing on what someone did 10 years ago and focusing on attachment styles. I stay away from most of that if one of the partners has narcissistic traits. So, and that's been trial and error as a process. So, just a little bit about treatment. To share, I certainly can be available for consultation and supervision and training for any therapists who want to work with someone who's narcissistic. But this was really meant as for people to have a little peek into the process and the therapy space and just building on the previous video I did that talked about interpersonal impairment in narcissism, because the two things really go together. The more interpersonally impaired someone is, the less they're going to get out of therapy, which I know is really rather tragic. But what I love to see, whether I'm working with someone with narcissism or borderline personality disorder, is just, small little windows of where they do lay down that sword and that shield, and they do trust for just a moment, because I think in that moment there is a small window for change, and however they have felt and whatever discomfort they've been able to temporarily work through or be able to accept is going to help them in real life. So not an entirely doom and gloom statement. I do hope that with proposed changes to the DSM and a deeper understanding of narcissism as a spectrum disorder, as I would say, even a disorder of childhood, which we don't think of either, that we'll see, some small windows of opportunity to build ways of helping these people. Sorry, I didn't come out very well. Of helping people who have narcissism and helping those who love them learn to have healthy boundaries and thus a more fulfilling relationship. So I look forward to a continued conversation. Please feel free to like, prescribe, get in the conversation, fire me off some questions. Always happy to answer them. And again, look for me on Facebook, Stacey Sanderson at Inquire Within. I think the Instagram handle is pretty much the same. And if you are just wanting to dip your toe in the water about narcissistic recovery, I have an online self-guided course called Finding Your Way. You'll find that on my website, staceysanderson.ca. And the initial feedback about Heart Wide Open, the book I've read, has been very validating. I'm hearing people say they're getting a lot out of it. So that means the world to me. So thank you for listening. Thanks for being part of this wider conversation, and take very good care.